Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out to this virtual event through Sky Meadow Institute. Today, we're honored to have with us Dr. Theo Dawson. Dr. Dawson is a giant in the field of developmental psychology. She's worked closely with other giants such as Kurt Fisher, Cheryl Armand, and Michael Commons. Through work spanning 3 decades, which she'll walk us through in just a minute, Dr. Dawson and her colleagues have advanced the science of developmental metrics and methods into a new era. Reading her articles, one is humbled by the profound diligence and scrupulous rigor that has made these advances possible. Personally, it reminds me of the feeling I get when I read Galileo's experiments with inclined planes. There's like this sense of, sure, this idea is insightful and someone could do it, and it would stand to reveal deep patterns about reality. But I can't believe someone actually did go through all the trouble with such relentless dedication in order to advance our collective understanding this way. But advance our collective understanding she has. And to have done it all in a male-dominated and often domineering field against vast institutional headwinds renders the achievement, I think, all the more impressive. The products of this multi-decade effort are theoretically and practically staggering, for they represent, among other things, nothing less than the achievement of the first standard ruler for mental development. No science can advance far without shared units of measurement. I mean, just think of what scientific inquiry would look like without the metric system. But length and mass are easy compared to the variable of human cognition. Today, though, thanks to Dr. Dawson's tireless work, we have in the Lectical scale an incredibly precise, theoretically grounded, empirically supported measure for mental development. The implications are extraordinary, but nowhere more so than in the field of education, the reformation of which I take it has always been the energizing passion behind Dr. Dawson's work. And today, the stakes couldn't be higher, with a broken, failing education system lying at the very heart of our collective metacrisis. But here I'll hand things over to Dr. Dawson to say more, who also has agreed to do some Q&A after the presentation. So please hold questions, be thinking of questions throughout. And we just really want to thank you, Dr. Dawson, for taking the time to do this presentation. Clearly, I have a very, very high and appreciation for your work. And so I think this is a really exciting opportunity for people to get a sense of the breadth and the scope of that work over the 3 decades that you've been at this. So with that, I'll hand this over to you, make you co-host, and feel free to start sharing your screen whenever you'd like. And yeah, for everyone else, again, just stay muted during the presentation and hold your questions till the end. We'll have 20 to 30 minutes at the end for Q&A, and we're going to around 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard. So thank you so much, Dr. Dawson. Take it away.
Thank you for that, Brendan. I'm going to send that to my mom. I might actually get finally to the point where I can impress her with something. All right. Thank you, Brendan, for inviting me to come and speak with this group. I'm really looking forward to it, partly because I gave a shorter version of this presentation earlier last week and did feel that something was really missing that I wanted to have in this talk. So I've expanded it a little. You said that I could take more time. So I've expanded it a little just to fill in some gaps that I think by filling them in, you're going to get a clearer and cleaner picture of what it is I'm talking about here. It's called From Theory to Practice, Cultivating Minds That Are Ready for Almost Anything, which I really believe has to be the aim of education into the future, because we have no idea what's coming. We don't know what our children are going to be faced with, and we don't know what the options are going to be. So building an educational system that allows us to flourish in such a way that we can adapt to these new situations seems absolutely critical to me. It all started with a big idea in about 1998 when all the kind of the theoretical pieces came together for me in my thinking about developmental theory and developmental measurement. And I could see the possibility that we would be able to continuously monitor children over time and watch their growth if we could develop a metric that was sophisticated enough to be able to measure development in small increments, in tiny increments. And at the time, we were only doing whole stage scoring, which meant that, you know, a stage could be many years long, and you wouldn't really know much about an individual person. It was mostly useful for research purposes in the early days. So I made it my mission to try to create an automated scoring system that was accurate and could be used in any context. So it wouldn't be about a particular thing at all. It would be about whatever is there in whatever it is that you're talking about, regardless of the subject matter or, you know, the particular content that would be there. And that's been what I've been working on since 1998, is building the capacity for figuring this out and creating the measurement instrument that would ultimately make it possible to do this. So, but at this point, it was just something I imagined was possible. And I just believed enough in it that I was willing to try to do the work. I did not realize it would take this long. Otherwise, maybe not. But here I am, still doing it. So, an overview of this presentation. I'm going to do a little bit about content and structure and the Lectical assessment system, because that was the first step, being able to understand the relation between content and structure and being able to build a human scoring system that would allow us to award scores at a finer grain than we had been able to before. So the first step is just get a little better, get a little better, get a little better. And the Lectical assessment system and understanding content and structure better were the first steps toward getting there. And then we're going to just be looking at some questions, and how we've gone about trying to answer those questions and what we have concluded from the posing of those questions over time. And the first one is, how can we optimize human development? And in order to be able to do that, we have to really understand what develops first, right? If you don't know what it is that you'd like to see develop, then how can you even begin to answer the question of what to optimize? And then the other big question there is, why do we learn? Because if we don't know why we learn, then we can't leverage. We can't, we can't take advantage of that, whatever it is, fundamental thing that drives us to learn and the way that that actually works in our brains. And then the second big question is, how can we show that we're succeeding? So if we are on a journey to try to optimize learning, then we would like to have a way of measuring whether or not we are actually accomplishing that particular goal. And in the past, educational assessments have been proxies for what it is that people really want to measure. Because I think that the people who make the big international tests and all of the high stakes tests that our children are forced to take, what they really would like to be able to measure is human development, mental development. But where they've settled in terms of what they think is possible is correctness. So all of those assessments are basically focused on correctness, assuming that there is a relationship between our ability to be correct and give right answers and the development of our mind. And I'm sure there's a correlation there, but they know that they're just proxies. They know they're not quite getting at the construct. And when I was working with them at Berkeley, when they were developing these first tests back in the 90s, they also knew it was risky to do high stakes testing with proxies because testing drives instruction, period. And once we have measures, those measures start to drive things. And it's the same with human testing as it is with anything else. So there's four big ideas that I think you'd need to understand to get a handle on what it is that we've been doing. And those are really ideas about learning and how learning works that are fundamental to everything that we've done. So the first one is that learning involves what Baldwin and Piaget called the circular reaction. So this is like way back at the beginning of the last century, just prior to the beginning of the last century. People were already noticing when they were looking at learning in young children that there was some kind of interaction with the environment that was taking place that was repetitive and persistent. and they named it. They gave it the name circular reaction. Um, the second one is that the mind is designed to develop through practice. And this builds off of the circular reaction because when they observed the circular reaction, it was always in the practice of application or figuring out or experimenting um, that was observed. And in every single case, it was new skills that were being built. And in young children, the new skills are really to observe as skills. It makes sense that they're skills to us because they fit the usual definition of skill. We'll talk about more later. Um, but our ultimate conclusion is that the mind itself is designed to develop through practice, that there's something about this circular reaction that's universal in learning, and that it is part of a process that develops skill. And we're going to talk about skill definitions. Skill development involves a process of hierarchical integration. So you gradually build skills through interaction with the environment, and those skills periodically go through periods in which they get transformed into something that doesn't look quite like the same skill anymore. It looks like something more emergent, something that's different. It's not, you can see a relationship, but it's not a one-to-one correspondence anymore. And finally, that hierarchical integration is something that we can actually observe directly in the structure of speech productions. So looking at the structure of the way an argument's organized, and indirectly through the meanings that they contain. And we'll be talking more about what I mean by that. But before I go there, I just want to talk a little bit about the history behind the work. And these folks here are the major influences, most major influences in my work. And I'm not sure I think I can put names to almost all of them, but I'm not going to take the time to do that right now. I do want to point out, if for those of you who know Adam Leonard, that Peirce, who is on the right below Tillman in the second row, looks an awful lot like one of our colleagues. Brendan's smiling. I'm thinking of Adam Leonard, so go look at a picture of Adam Leonard. He looks an awful lot like Adam Leonard. The two guys at the bottom are Baldwin and Piaget. The Baldwin is the kind of thoughtful, gentle-looking one, and Piaget is just a funny-looking guy with an amazing brain. All right, everybody's going to recognize things like this. This kind of thing is still being used all the time, right? Brendan, you're using figures like this. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how these things were lined up with one another and to do it in a way that wasn't just theoretical, but to do it in a way that was really practical, that let us actually see what those relationships are. And I think it's important to talk about that because you have to defend that your levels are related to something that's already out there. Mine are most closely related to Piaget Commons and Fisher and Bedell's levels, but most of these other most of the other scales that are here also relate to those. So we are all coming out of the same basic tradition. We spent a long time trying to understand the relationship between content and structure. And when I originally started looking at this, I was being influenced by Kohlberg primarily, who was making the case that previous developmental systems hadn't really worked very well because our focus was too much on particular content, particular conceptual content, and not enough on the structures that we were creating in our arguments around things. And he wanted to create a system that was really based on concept, but that got to the structure level. And the system, if any of you have ever seen the manual, it's like the manual's about this thick. And the way you score is actually by finding performances or statements that people make that match things that are in the manual. So he's trying to get at structure, but he's still using content matching in the manual so that you're not directly looking at structure when you're doing scoring there for the most part. There's a little bit of structural information in the manual, but it's a little amorphous, and you end up just going back and looking at the structures that we, in that case, we call them surface surface structures or conceptual content, depending upon what people are doing with them. So the first little study I did was to take a bunch of performances from Kohlberg's work and take them around to people who use different kinds of scoring system, and I had them score them out loud. So I kind of out loud spoken protocol. And I recorded what the kinds of things that they said when they were scoring them. And you can see on the conceptual content side on the right top, this is a standard issue scoring manual example. One of the people said about the thing that was the item that was being quoted here, richer life and open mind are cliches. I don't think there's a structure called cliche. So I think that even when people are trying to work with a system that gets you to structure, or that gets us closer to structure in our measurement, that there's always the potential for starting to look just at the content itself, and starting to think that there's something called a cliche that belongs at a certain level in a system without justifying it in structural terms. The next layer down is the surface structure. And again, we see someone using this standard issue scoring system, talking about this being an additive notion rather than transformative. Those are those are the kinds of things that Kohlberg was calling structure at the time. And then we get people who say things like the use of probably along with would and wouldn't indicates multiple variables with the hierarchical complexity scoring system. So here we're really talking about structure in a way that's easy to see that it's structure. It's right there on the page. And also abstract variables, richer life, open mind, are in a logical relation to one another as clearly structural. But what's really interesting about this is that these people were giving the same basic scores, regardless of the systems they were using. And I got to thinking, okay, so there's definitely a lot of convergence in all of this. And if I use all the knowledge that's out there right now, maybe we can get closer and closer to understanding that structure piece, but also the relation between content and structure. So we did this. We mapped out meanings. Hundreds of these are in my database, where we just tried to understand how does this major idea that's here, a good education. So how do we get a concept of good education that looks like this? Like what's going on here? So you can see there's definitely structure here. There's structure in the way that these ideas relate to one another. We've got some ideas that are more unpacked than others in this production so that we can see how it's important because unpacks in their mind, and we're getting all these different ideas and meanings that are coming together. But ultimately, all of these meanings that have been constructed by this person in this particular performance are relating to one idea, which is what is a good education. So we can see that these are ideas that meanings, each of these meanings in each of these boxes is built on other meanings and built on other meanings and built on other meanings all the way up to the top. And I started thinking, we don't need to choose to look at structure to be directly at structure in order to make a good scoring system if we really understand meaning and how meanings develop. And that was the beginning of thinking of a way to create an electronic scoring system, because to model structure back in those days, model the structure of one performance would take hours. But if we could do something with meaning, and a dictionary of meanings in particular, we could do something that could become instant. So we did that. But before we did that, we had to resolve a problem that we were having with Michael Common's scoring system that was causing us to sometimes score things a whole level at a whole level difference. So in the image on the right, which is a model of Fisher's system, that would mean that we would confuse level 12 and level 9 with one another. Because Common System provides descriptions of each level, but it doesn't have this repeating structures thing going on. And it wasn't until we inserted the idea of repeating structures that we solved the problem of making really big mistakes in scoring. And also, this just started by getting us to look at this relationship between structure and abstraction. We started to get much more refined in our ability to score pretty rapidly after that, so that we went from all stage scoring to half stage scoring to three level scoring in a pretty rapid succession. And we ultimately landed at four phase scoring and then scoring much more precisely, but only once we actually had the scoring happening online in an interactive environment, so that the the scorers had a wealth of materials that they could use to help structure the scores that they were giving. And this also afforded us with the ability to do something called rational reconstruction. Don't know who introduced this concept, but Habermas talked a lot about the concept. And this was the idea of separating the structure and the content completely from one another. So learning how to score so that we're really just we're just looking at the structure of the performances to score them. So we're not really looking at the meanings anymore so much as just the structures. And when we are looking at meaning, we're looking at the structure of that meaning. We're looking at we're trying to unpack that meaning and look at it as a map, as a meaning map, so that we can see what structures inside of it. And so the idea was we can score with the Lectical assessment system, and then we can bring the meaning back and pair it with where it was found when we scored. And in that way, we could create sequences of descriptions of learning at different levels. And that was going to be the big thing that we were going to make. We were going to be rubrics that teachers could use in their classrooms with these descriptions in them. So just for an example, we did some work with the golden rule. So in Kohlberg's model, the golden rule was assigned to stage 3, Fisher's level 10. And what we found when we looked more closely at the way people were using the golden rule in performances, we discovered that it's like good education. It sounds like the same concept, but when you unpack it, you get a whole range of things, starting with do to others what they do to you. And then do unto others so they will do what you want. We've all seen our children learn this, right? Do unto others as you hope they will do unto you. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you if you were actually them and not you. So that's really putting, the perspective elsewhere. And do unto others as you would have them do unto you if you did not know what societal position either of you occupied. So, all the way from toddlers to post toddlers to really, really high level thinking about how to structure societies, right? Very fun. We also did things with the nature of knowledge and truth. There was a big claim being made by people in this field that people didn't get to relativism. There was no relativism until you reached abstract systems thinking because of work that was done by Perry back in the 50s. Notably, he only studied college students, so we wouldn't have expected him to pick it up in younger kids. So we thought maybe this is really a cultural phenomenon because I noticed that my kids in the 80s were all by the age of 13 just saying, it's all good. Remember that? Were you there? I remember just like being, oh my God, please don't say that. It's but anyway, so I was thinking, well, maybe that's not completely true. And certainly, like any other kind of way of thinking, it's got to develop over time. So we looked at this in data from early childhood, and we really could trace the origins of multiple types of relativism from from their roots all the way up to these really highly complex constructs. So all of this time, I'm learning about how meaning gets constructed. And we went through many years of doing a lot of meaning constructions of this kind. But at the same time that we were doing that, I was also developing an approach to doing assessment electronically just by focusing on meanings. Right now, we're going to skip and put that back down at the end because I want to emphasize the ideas that are behind this work. So here's the circular reaction. Okay, I'm not sure I'm going to keep showing that picture of Piaget with the baby because it is a little bit creepy, but it's also kind of cute. It's weird. It gets my attention every time. But the point of this particular image is just to illustrate this circular reaction and to show you that it is a virtuous cycle. It's not just circular, it's actually part of a virtuous cycle. So we know that infants build skills for picking up items and putting in their mouths through these repeated cyclic interactions with the text. If you've had children, you've watched this happen, or if you have friends with children. And each of these cycles involves something like a kind of goal. Like I want something. There's something I want to accomplish or do or eat or something. I want a Cheerio. A scan of the environment because they have to choose which Cheerio or find where it is first, right? Figure out which one they want, locate it, try picking it up. Here goes. And then they get a result, which can be whoops or nummy, depending upon the level of success. And they will try this over and over and over again until they get really good at it and then they abandon it completely and do something else. And every child does this. Every child I ever met in my midwifery career did exactly this all the time with everything that basically they were learning. So I started thinking of this as a virtuous cycle. It's a cycle that builds upon itself and creates more and more knowledge, more and more skill over time. And we just took that picture and we created the model called the VCall with a set, seek, apply, and reflect step. Really simple, really basic, no frills, tiny little thing that we could start putting to work in a lot of places in our lives and work. And so I often say to people, all of Lectica is micro V-calling all the time, really intentionally. Like that's what we do. And we've learned a lot from programming and agile and other systems that are doing the same thing. Uh, it's nature's way of dealing with highly complex situations without right and wrongs. And so nature has built a system in our brains that makes us do this cycle because it's the best, most efficient way to learn. It's nature's way. And we see this over and over again throughout disciplines in different areas as well. So, what's a kid doing when they're learning to walk? Well, they're in the environment. They're in an environment. They're in multiple environments. They're starting out doing things that aren't walking at all, things like crawling, sitting, scooting on their butts, like they do all sorts of really interesting, fun things. They are using things in their environment to support themselves. They're getting scaffolding from family members who, hold their hands so that they can get that feeling of walking before they're actually able to walk on their own. They get hurt a lot and it makes them cry and they get frustrated, but they just get right back up and they do it again. So I'd really like all adults to behave that way. Like if we all still had this running the show, then we would all be constantly hungry for the next cool thing that's coming along. And we'd be willing to suffer a little bit to get there. And we would be learning the way that our brains are designed to learn. Okay, so next question, what develops? So Fisher showed us that mental development is essentially skill development. Most of those ideas come from him. He didn't say this exactly, I don't think, but we have come to say a skill is anything that develops through practice. And this sounds like it's a bigger thing than it is when we start looking at, what is a skill according to that definition and is what not a skill. You get some very clear distinctions between things that we call skills that aren't really skills. You can't practice. Um, you can't just practice them in the moment. And more advanced skills develop through the coordination of smaller skills. We've already seen that with some of the meanings that we were putting up before. And when I say skills, when I say skills, one of the things that we've really come to appreciate is that these skills actually can only be practiced one way. There's only one way you can practice a skill in real time. Yeah, it has to be something that you can practice right now in real time. So when I look at this map, I think, oh, I can't really practice collaborative capacity in real time. It's too big. But I can practice regulating my emotions. And so we started to think, okay, so let's take that skill, that meaning mapping idea that we had from before when all those meaning maps we did, and try to start deconstructing some of these higher order meanings into their smaller components so that education would look more like giving people the opportunity to practice a whole bunch of smaller skills that coalesce ultimately to create the larger skills. And you can see there's several steps along the way here. But the smaller skills around the outside are the ones that people who are new to this need to get good at before they're ever going to be able to be good at collaborative capacity. So this is the way we think about the skill universe now. We think of it as, if we're looking at a skill, we can break it down into subcomponents, and then we can encourage or provide opportunities for people to build skills in all the small skills, gradually building up to the mastery of the larger skill. Now, think about this in contrast to what happens when you go to school and you're learning about collaborative capacity. You're not learning to do it, you're learning about it. So, people who've got a model of collaborative capacity, and you have to learn the names of all the parts and what they do. But those aren't skills that you can go out and practice. So, you're learning about, not learning how. We're completely focused on learning how. Now, this is a different kind of skill map, and this is the kind of skill map that if you're working with, especially in adult communities, but also more and more in K-12, when they talk about skills, they're talking about things that look like this. There's only one thing here that looks like I could really unpack it and create a map out of it, and that's emotional regulation, because there are just a whole bunch of little skills that add up over time to that capacity to regulate emotion. But intuition is an emergent property. You get to intuition by building a good mind, by doing all the practice that you need to do to build a good mind. Tolerance for risk, again, like emergent property. It comes from all kinds of practice in the real world, from all kinds of different things. Personality traits, we're born with most of those. How's that a skill? And so we're thinking really sloppily about skill. And in thinking this sloppily about skill, that's why we haven't had the intuition that we recently have had, that, oh, skills can be broken down into smaller parts and then people can learn the smaller part. Now, people who teach music know this. People who teach, physical skills in the world know this, but people who are actually trying to develop minds, outside of just the physical world, skills around, self-regulation and social skills, they're falling into the trap of thinking about it this way and not taking advantage of the fact that we can much more rapidly build these skills by having people practice all the little skills and just allow the brain to do its thing where it connects everything up. Brains are really good at that. Okay, finally, we're on to why do we learn? So what's the mechanism and where is it? Like, where is it, the stuff? So why do we learn? Well, as it turns out, and this is something that Piaget and Baldwin did not know because this is something we learned toward the end of the last century. We learn because we're driven to learn by the dopamine opioid cycle. And in fact, all animals that learn have a dopamine opioid cycle. The dopamine opioid cycle is designed for one thing and one thing only, learning. And we live in a society where we use it for literally everything else but we don't use it for learning. The moment children enter our educational system, they start learning stuff. And it's imposed on the outside. Someone else has decided when they're ready to learn it. It's assumed that they're all going to be able to learn it at the same time. They end up memorizing because they don't understand what's going on. And the dopamine opioid cycle is not being used for learning. So we do things like bring in AI to make it fun to memorize things. And again, prevent the real process it's designed for from being able to take advantage of it. This is one of the greatest sins of, you can call them sins of our ideas about learning, in particular in this century. And with an exception of a progressive period during the 20th century, all the way back into time, people have really thought of formal learning as giving people content, content, and specific content. The content that regulators want, the content that business wants, the content that is going to, that where we want to have, actually fill roles. So in the late 90s, it was, we need more scientists, so we need more kids to be interested in science. Not because we need more actual scientists, but we need people to sit in the offices with the telescopes looking through them, doing the same routine thing over and over again. But they beguiled kids in with promises of, you're going to become a great scientist, to get people to come and participate in those programs. So what we really ought to be doing is organizing the system to keep the dopamine opioid cycle running. And that requires a very different kind of education. The other part of this is, the other part of the answer to why do we develop is because we've got a brain, and we've got a brain that's constructed in a very particular way that benefits the most from learning that happens in an embodied context. But people who are working in the field that this picture comes from, which is the Connectome Project, are learning is that the best brains, the brains of people who are the most effective in a wide variety of ways now, are brains in which there are connections between all of the parts of the brain. So that knowledge is actually not located in one place, it's located with connections to emotion and body sensation and sensory information. And the more they're interconnected, the more noise there is going across the different sectors, the more capable those people are, the more agile their brains are, the better they are at solving problems, they're more better regulated, all kinds of things. So there's this magic in the human mind. There's this magical, wonderful combination of things that, I like to think AI has got like maybe a fifth of this, and it's missing so many of the pieces that would allow AI to ever become human-like. And what better time than now to start celebrating the human mind and loving it and growing them, because we no longer have to raise people who can be computers. So there's this opening for us. We've got computers to do that part. But what does that mean we can become? I'm so excited about that. I can barely breathe. So it really took all three of these things coming together, just this notion of the cycle, having a model for it, understanding the dopamine opioid component of it, and then seeing the connectome and finding out how the brain needs to be connected up in order for us to function optimally. Everything we do here is based on trying to make this kind of growth happen. Everything we make, all of our tools, all the research that we do is really focused on how do we get to a point where we can understand better how this works. And now we can get onto the nitty-gritty. That's the mighty micro recall. And here are the micro recalling skills, just in case you're wondering. Not only do we need to be in touch with the dopamine opioid cycle, but we need to learn to manage it and leverage it. So these are all the skills that we need to not only keep it going, but to get it working optimally so that when we're learning in this super embodied, really effective way that's going to build the best kind of mind we can possibly. We all start out with different genetics, and some of us we'd hit different kinds of lotteries, right? This model allows everybody to pursue the path that's right for their mind. rather than imposing the same kind of expectation on everyone. And here's what a micro VCall looks like. It's just this tiny itty bitty little thing where we do the set, seek, apply, and reflect step. This one's noticing emotions. So it's about building skills for naming the feelings you experience when you're interested. And then having a chat with a few people about what they think about this and how they experience it. Then just applying it. So when you're feeling interested, try to name the feelings. And then quickly describe that to yourself right in the moment, because we don't want to interrupt the flow of your daily life with these micro calls. And then finally, a week or so later, doing some more in-depth reflection, either solo or in a social context around these. So these are designed specifically to help people build the skills that they need to be a really great micro caller and really recruit that dopamine opioid cycle and the push it's constantly giving us, and the flow it's constantly giving us, and incorporate that into the way that they learn on a day-to-day basis. This is all being done in our micro call maker, which is completely free, and on our website for people who want to learn to micro call on their own. The way that CLAS works is that we take all of that stuff I've been talking about, meanings, really seriously. And we create what's called a developmental dictionary. We call the developmental dictionary the Lectical dictionary. And it's very much like other dictionaries in that it's some kind of curated taxonomy of meanings. But this one is structured a little bit differently. What you're looking at here in the little table is lectical levels: 05, 06, 07, 08, 09, 10, and 11. And you're looking at lists of meanings, and I'm calling them meanings and not words because the way that we curate them is as meanings. So when we see mama, we go look where it's being used, and we look for the lowest level places where it's being used meaningfully. And we think about what its meaning is in that context. And we're looking for the lowest level useful meaning that something has. So sometimes little kids parrot, so they just repeat back the words their parents are saying, or they practice some new word that they heard that day by saying it over and over again. We're looking for that word used in context, like really pointing to mama, like, or directed to mama. And then we put it at the lowest level at which we find it in the dictionary. So each one of these buckets is a really important piece of the dictionary. Now, we have way more buckets than this because each one of these buckets is broken up into 4 additional buckets. So there's buckets at a quarter of a level. There's 25 of them altogether. And the scoring system looks at the density distribution of the meanings in your buckets. So that means the percentage relative to the total. Yeah, so hang on for just a second. I'm going to show you another picture that might help to make it a little bit clearer. By the way, before I do that, I think anybody who's looking at this can see that these ideas become more complex over time, going from right to left, from left to right. The meanings that where we place them are increasingly complex. They represent working skillfully with meanings until you get to the point where you can make meaning of that particular concept. All right, next step. Now you get to see what it looks like when a performance comes in before it gets scored. This is this is the percentage. This represents the percentage. Can you see my cursor, guys?
Yep.
Okay. So the one I'm circling represents the percentage, or what we call the density, of terms from 6B in this performance. And it's the same for all of the densities. So this is a very, very young person just beginning to speak. And they get a score from our system of 626. All of these at the top scores, each of these. And there's several things to look at here. You can see that over time, the distributions are crawling to the right. And you can see also after the first row, which is a little complicated, it works a little bit differently than the succeeding rows. You also see that the peak at 6D, which the peak stays at 6D for the whole lifetime, comes down as more of the meanings that that person is carrying kind of become more and more and more abstract over time. Um, this stays here. This first peak stays. It never goes away. Took us a long time to figure out why, which once we realized it was one of the true no-duh experiences of my life, is grammar. And grammar and the words in a language that are used to construct every sentence in the language. Like they're necessary words for any kind of construction. So there's always going to be a bump there that holds those meanings because you're always going to be using those meanings. And the ones that I'm talking about are in the grammar, so they're in this area. These very first terms really aren't part of grammar. They're mostly nouns or noun-like things. So you can see that that there's a way in which there's just a kind of gradual kind of pulling out to the right. And as you move up into higher and higher scores, that pulling to the right continues. And then when we move on to the next levels, if I can get it to do it, yep. You can see that that pattern continues all the way through until we get to a level 11. So it's like you've got this kind of fairly flat base. It's actually a little higher at the left than it is at the right overall, and then it's gradually trailing off. And that's true all the way up through level 10. And then when we get to 11, we start to see a bump beginning to form at around the 11B, 11C arena. And the reason that's happening is because just like we still have a bump at the beginning, because we've got grammar, we have crowding at the end because we run out of words. We run out of meanings. So we just don't have a lot of meanings that are labeled 11D. There's just there, and the reason there aren't very many is because the moment that somebody comes up with a new term that has an 11D meaning, the word gets into the world and gets downward assimilated, and the common meaning bears little relation to the original intended meaning. So we're always up against the fact that language is alive, and sexy sounding words really get into the language really fast. Like Wilbur had all these sexy sounding terms, and all of those got into the language super fast and have been downward assimilated, um, down to lower 11 for the most part, which is kind of a shame because they did stand for meanings that would be lovely if we could sum them up in a word, but that becomes really difficult. So, so this is what the scoring system's basically doing. It's looking at every performance and it's looking at these patterns, which you can clearly see are just mostly accumulations of more and more abstract ideas. Remembering that these abstract ideas represent lots of arguments. Like, every idea could be unpacked into one of those graphs that I was showing you at the beginning. So many meanings are represented in any one meaning, and there's all this structure that's in there that we don't see directly, but it's made it possible for us to, by doing a whole lot of human work, thousands and thousands of hours of human work, get to the point where there's not a whole lot of human work left to do. So we can start using the scoring system to be able to score almost anything, anywhere, anytime at this point. And it even works with Google Translate very well in the research that we've done so far, including in languages like Japanese. It's super cool from our perspective. All right, so I'm going to just do a little aside around fairness here because I think one of the first things that comes to people's mind is, are you guys really sure that you're being fair to everybody? I mean, are you discriminating against any groups? Is there, danger of people receiving scores that they don't deserve because you haven't taken into account their way of thinking? Well, there's a couple of things. One is that we intentionally sampled really broadly. We sampled from all over the world, from multiple languages in ESL with translations, and we've got samples from all of the economic statuses. that are pretty large. There's about 50 to 60,000 performances in our database now, representing a really wide swath of the world and socioeconomic conditions. And so we thought, well, this is a good time because we've got enough data. Let's take a look at how fair we really are being to these groups. And so we've collected educational level, ethnicity information, um, and English as second language information and gender information throughout all of the time that we've been doing the research. So here is what it looks like for sex. Here's the lower and upper averages. Here are the lower and upper averages for sex. No difference. Here are the upper and lower averages for ESL. The ESLs are doing a little better. We weren't expecting that. I think it's because of translators. And here we have the one that we're most proud of is the ethnicity one, where we're showing very little difference between ethnic groups in our sample. And the differences that are there are kind of different from the ones we usually see typically in this kind of research. So we're really pleased that we're being fair to all of these people. Okay, I want to look at some growth trajectories with you. Um, there's two kinds of maps that we show. Maps like the ones that you just saw that show the distributions of meanings across the buckets in the class system. These kinds of growth trajectories are just looking at an individual growing over time. And this is something that's been really, really hard to do and very, very expensive. Olberg was able to do 5 rounds, but it took 25 years back in the day to do that. We can do this every day if you want. We don't recommend it, but so this is what we were able to do back in the day when we could only assess people over many years and we had really coarse measures. And this is Cheryl Arman's wonderful work on good life reasoning, which we also have in our database. So it's something that we are able to look at now with our new tools as well. But yeah, that was my first effort. We did everything by hand on that one. The computer software wasn't so great. The second thing that we did took a lot of years for us to get to was to get enough data on children in different educational contexts to be able to tell or to start asking the question, does the way that we do instruction matter in terms of the children's development? And in this project, we were able to show that students who were in schools where there was a whole lot of e-calling going on. So those are also called practice-based curricula. There's a bunch of other names for them. But curricula, they're mostly offering kids opportunities to put their knowledge to work, to build skill. Definitely do better and have a steeper slope in their growth trajectories. Kids that are in more conventional schools with some V-calling, whether they're public or private, if they're high quality schools, are doing a better job than our inner city schools, which you see at the bottom, where growth is slowing down over time relative to everyone else, and where the average student in the sample of tens of thousands of students is projected to stop growing at about grade 9 or 10 on our scale. In contrast, the kids who are in the really high V calling conditions, they show their projections show growth well into their 40s and 50s, just from basic projections. Now, this is also true. It is also true that even when we took SES into account, these remained strong patterns. So we've known this for a long, long time, many, many years now. No one's interested. I haven't found any real interest from anybody in education and this information yet because we decided to change to the way that we did research, and developmental stuff was on the bad list. It's coming back, guys. The good news is it's coming back. So what we can do now is, because we can score frequently, is we can track the development of our children for their whole lives if we want to. And we can keep records of that they contribute to in different ways across the course of their lifespans. And they can take their subscription in adulthood and continue working with it through their lifespan. Like I'm probably going to be using it to watch my decline and just catch it, early so that I can take whatever drug it is that they come up with that's supposed to make it better. Um, but but this opportunity just has so many implications, and I'm not even going to go into all of them here, but just some of the implications. Let's just say you're a teacher in a classroom and you've got these three kids all across the top are in your classroom. They're all the same exact age. They're in the classroom learning exactly the same material. And some of them are definitely not, well, none of them are in exactly the same place in terms of their growth right now. None of them are. They're all really different from one another. And my immediate response to this is we should definitely not be putting these kids all in the same classroom learning exactly the same stuff. I can imagine classrooms they could be in where they could be learning different things, like in their own zone, but I don't think expecting kids just because they're of a certain age justifies putting them into one classroom. This is something that the public educational community here in the States isn't really aware of. Like we in 2000 we decided that was the best, fairest way to do education, and everybody believes it is. And what we're doing is we're giving the kids that are behind a chance to catch up. And the problem with that thinking is that the kids that are behind are slower learners. They started out being slower learners. And so you're going to get them to speed up and catch up with the kids that were born faster learners. This does not happen. It is impossible. You can't you can't change the genetic makeup of that child. You need to meet them where they are at their growth edge so that they have an opportunity to grow as best they can with the mind that they have. And so what we're doing with a product that we're putting out called MindLog is we're going to give teachers the opportunity to see these, but without telling them that they mean anything. Just we'll let you watch your kid, the students in your classes grow and let them gradually begin to connect what they're observing about the kids themselves and grow that intuition that all teachers need that allows a really good teacher to say, I know what you'd like to see next. Which is something that's really not there for our teachers, and especially in the inner city here at all. So the top row represents what educators could see. The bottom row represents what kids would see. So you notice on the kids ones, there's no score, and they're basically showing the same slope. So for kids who are now in classrooms where they're being told that if you don't make it to college, you're a loser, and you're not going to make it to college because your scores are too low, kids are hearing, you're a loser. You're a complete loser and you're never going to make it. There's no chance that you're going to be a successful human being. In contrast to telling that, we're telling them you're a grower. We can celebrate the growth that you've done, the growth that you've accomplished, which is an encouragement that, that nature gives us, that we can try the next step. Like it's worth trying the next step. It's worth it to keep myself in that dopamine opioid cycle, striving for that next step in my understanding and my skill building over time. So that's a powerful, cool thing that we can do. And what we can do looks a lot like what I set out imagining, except that right now I want to strip the subjects out almost completely. And I want it to be areas of interest instead. And this is what it would look like today if we put one of those together. So we've come full circle on the ability, wanting to get to the place where we could do that kind of thing. But the thing that I didn't realize that we were doing, because I didn't have there was no data like this up there, was that because we can score electronically and easily, theoretically, not so much on these really little kids because we're still learning how to make the dictionary work well for them. But these are little kids. These are kids from a study done in the 1960s. It's Adam and Sarah here. Adam's on the left, Sarah's on the right. This was the mid 60s, portable tape recorders, reel to reel, but you could carry them. They were heavy. And they can take them to kids' houses and they can just record the kids talking in their own homes. So that's what they did. And with Adam, they did that every 2 weeks. And then after they were working with him, they decided that they would up it for Sarah to once a week. So that's why Adams looks a little less populated. Adams also looks different in another way, and that is that it looks really, really regular. There's not a whole lot of up and down, which looks kind of abnormal to me because we know that growth looks more like this than straight line. And I got to wondering, well, why is that going on? The other thing we noticed here is that there's spurts and plateaus. So Piaget claimed that we would. I don't know that Piaget claimed that we would see spurts and plateaus. That wasn't him. Some of the neo-Piagetians did. They said that if learning is hierarchical and there is a point at which we're kind of reorganizing our thinking in a new way, then there should be a spurt following that reorganization. So following the plateau, at the end of a plateau, the reorganization can take place. And we can see in both of these a pattern of relatively level periods followed by spurts and fall. I like, wow, they're there. They're actually there. First time we've ever seen them there in this context. But there's a problem. There are there are spurts and plateaus associated with changes between levels, but there's also one in the middle that we've never proposed was there. So it looks like maybe there's more levels than we thought. And I'm really looking forward to having a lot of data from people who are growing over a long period of time so that we can really ask that question and then really think about the implications of it for learning and and how we support learning of individual students. The other cool thing that's going on here is that these kids were recorded in really different contexts. So the kid on the right was recorded in her home while she was playing, and mom was going about the house doing what mom does, and there were other kids around to play with, um, and of course, more frequently. And Adam, in contrast, was being recorded sitting on his mom's lap with her steering his thinking the whole time. So his mom was providing a lot of support. So you know how new parents are with their first kids. Like we always want them to just be the smartest kid, and we're always giving them the more complex book and giving them the better, more adult word for things, and just trying to help them grow so they can compete better in the world. And this mom was really, really into that, and she was for the entire 2.5 years of the program. She just right on him. Um, so what we're seeing here is scaffolding, and when we scaffold, we do see these patterns. When we know that we're scaffolding people, we see these patterns. The question is, does it bring any benefit? So do we get any benefits out of that? So when I look at these two superimposed upon one another, um, I can see that that Sarah did start out performing at a lower level, and that Adam at a higher level, but that it looks like Adam is kind of losing ground relative to Sarah over time, as though having all of that support was actually preventing him from being able to grow his mind properly because he wasn't practicing in the way of practicing that we're designed to practice. He wasn't finding his own goals. He wasn't identifying them. He wasn't doing it in the real world. It was being taught in a more um, pedantic way by a mom who was a school teacher who wanted her kid to be able to compete. And here's the consequences of that. That Adam started out ahead, but got behind. And this is just one way that I've seen this happen over the years. That the way that this willingness to allow children to develop the way their minds are designed to grow, it's really hard for humans, parents and teachers, to just support that happening. They want to do something. We have this tendency to want to do something. The same when I was a midwife. The doctors wanted to do something, and the midwives are like, "No, let's just let this process unfold." Um, we need to get more of the world thinking about letting processes unfold if we really, really want everybody to have a chance to grow optimally. Okay, and here's the last part. And but both sections here are brand new stuff. Um, I got really curious over the last couple of years about real differences in these kinds of density patterns. I started thinking, what the heck is going on here? Something's really going on. And then finally, this year, I realized that children in 2000 and children in the 2000s, in the 20th century, their patterns are completely different from patterns of kids in the 21st century. And we know a lot's changed in that period. One thing that changed in the States is that we made education more didactic again, and we started forcing kids to learn things earlier, and there was a lot of memorization involved. But we also had media and stuff starting to at the same time. So we can't untangle those two pieces completely at this point. So this is actually a, a child who's alive today and age 16, who's been brought up in a way that's more consistent with the kind of learning that we advocate, and hers looks really normal. So this is basically what we expect to see, a little variation because no system is perfect, but not a lot, just a nice smooth curve. Evidence that as she's developing over time, that she's not losing anything from what she's learned before. Like her conceptual structures from before are all still there, and she's probably been building new lower level constructions as she goes. So let's just say that let's just say you've studied the piano since you were 4 and you're a really good piano player by 16. You're got at that moment where you're really starting to be a piano player. And you decide, I want to take up the violin. Well, in order to learn the violin, you have to go back and learn some very basic, much less complex skills in order to build up to the level of skill that you have with piano. So the mind can't be a place where you can only learn abstract concepts of a certain kind when you're a certain age. It has to be a place where you could learn concepts at any level, anytime. And a mind that can do that is a really well connected brain. And a well connected brain has high densities in multiple levels, including lower levels, and that grows over time during the early part of development in the abstract level. This is an example of this is like the characteristic pattern for the 20th century. This is just totally characteristic. Um, the previous child is an outlier. We don't have hardly any kids like that in our database. But this is what the kids look like in the 20th century when we were doing progressive education, where we were actually streaming kids into groups where they had shared the same interests and capabilities. So the academic kids were put in academic programs so that they could thrive there. The kids who were really into mechanics got put into programs that were really made for them to thrive. And those things became frowned upon. Somebody decided that they were discriminatory. Um, I remember it being wonderful uh, because there was an acceptance that we were different from one another and that there were different kinds of useful and wonderful things that we would all be able to do in the world. And there was a celebration of our differences. There was no such thing as a whole bunch of kids just seeing themselves constantly as failures because they were being allowed to do things at their level that they were good at. We took that away in the year 2000 in the States, and a couple of other things happened at that moment in time. We got the idea that everybody has to go to college. We got the idea that Piaget was wrong and that we could learn things we had previously been learning in high school at grade 4. So we made the curriculum more different. We decided that it was fair to put all kids of the same age in the same grade because that gave them all exactly the same chance to grow, which is the dumbest thinking that I ever heard in my life, and it kind of fit the general politics of the time. Um, and and that whole pressure for all of them to go to college, and then we did high stakes testing. So the kids started to be measured by how much they memorized, and most kids just became memorizers because that was the game, and they call it the game, so they call it themselves. And so what happens when you do that to kids? You get a pattern that looks like this. So notice that there isn't any, I'm calling this sacrificial growth, by the way. The other one was here. We call the first one lossless growth. So nothing is being lost as we grow and develop more concepts. We're bringing everything with us and we're backfilling. This is pretty much lossless growth. And this is memorizing and forgetting. I'm memorizing and forgetting. I'm memorizing and forgetting. And there's a whole lot of things that I don't have time to talk about today that we see alongside this, like behavioral issues. I'll say the one that stands out the most for me as an employer is that these kids don't know when they don't understand because they've never been given the opportunity to deeply understand anything. They're being so rushed and so pushed that the best they can do is get a superficial understanding of what it is that they're learning. And if it's superficial, you never get the click. And so they don't even know what the click is. They've never experienced it. And it means that they don't know when to ask a question or when they don't know they think the answer is the right answer. So they go looking for someone who's got the right answer, maybe. But they'll often just think they already understand it because they can't differentiate between not understanding and understanding. And they're unemployable. You can't, if someone doesn't know when to ask, you can't employ them. And these are kids in a really prestigious public school with rich parents who could have done anything they wanted to do, but because every kid has to go to college in order to be a success, they're voting for pushing the kids. And so the kids get pushed. This is one of the very, very most expensive private schools in the United States, still showing a similar pattern, despite the fact that they are doing more things that are designed to allow kids to engage in praxis. There's still this pressure, you've got to get to college, you've got to memorize all the things that are going to be on the exams. And you can still see that same pattern of losing stuff along the way. This is inner city schools. This is our best performing 16-year-old that we have in our database in our public school that's in an inner city public school. So low SES, mostly schools. Um, Interestingly enough, she does not look very different from the first child that we looked at the beginning. I mean, it looks like she had potential. She had a good density of skills in the lower ranges to work with. But when she came to school at around 8A, 8B, things started to fall apart. She stopped building new ideas as well. She learned some new ones, but not very many. And then it looks like right about here, she started to realize she needed to just memorize. Like if I just memorize this stuff. So she's got concepts and she's got them for a while, but she doesn't seem to be able to build on them in any way in the future, or she gives up. Maybe she just gives up. So there's really literally through the last few years of school, nothing happening. This child is not growing at all. I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff happening in her life, but there's no growth happening at all. These are the kids that are under the most stress because they're starting out disadvantaged usually. And then all of them are being in this situation where they're just in this constant push to memorize more so that they can get out of the category of failure. What does constant failing like that and being told that you're no good and you're never going to make it do to us? I mean, I look around at all of the violence and all of the anger of young people and certain groups of young people, especially the disadvantaged. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's what you'd expect. You'd expect them to be really pissed off and distrustful of us. And that's what we got. This last part is really just a call to arms. We have the tool to do the research now. So any question anybody has about the mind and how it grows and how we can optimize growth and how we can create the kinds of minds that we need for this world that's coming. There's the researcher. I'm open to all of those ideas, and we're a nonprofit that's really dedicated to learning as much as we can so that we can start to create or continue to create tools, and other and information that will help the next generation of students grow in a more human or more fully human way to become humans that live in an AI world and find ways to make meaning there.
That was thank you, Theo. Fantastic, and just so much here. So yeah, if you've got a question, I guess, yeah, I see some hands raised. We'll go to you in just a second. I'm going to take my privileged position as the host for this to ask at least my question first, though I have so many, but I'll control myself. One of them is basically those uh, curves that you were showing. They all seem to get the same lectical score of 1053, but they all were showing different distributions. And so I guess my question
Yes.
related to
Yeah.
that is there another datum that we can apply to this kind of information to bring that aspect out of the score? Because if you're just looking at the lectical score, you might see, oh, well, those performances are all kind of, exactly comparable because it's the same score. And yet there's also this other element of the different distribution. So I guess it's just sort of
Yeah.
a
I,
question
I,
of,
th-
yeah.
I think that there will be something along the lines of based upon those distributions, not one of them from one performance, but multiple ones happening to a child over and over again, where we're seeing a pattern of having a method of notifying educators that we've gone suboptimal in the way that that child's learning, or we're going moving too fast for them, or whatever that pattern that we're seeing means, so that we can help them to kind of to get into a more optimal state before we start keep teaching them more things.
Mhm.
So if with respect to adults, the adults patterns aren't as easy to read as the kids patterns, because we have the wall caused by losing vocabulary at the higher levels. So I haven't figured out how to do that beyond level 10. Um, the patterns don't look as distinctively different from one another at level 10. And that may be because most people who get past level 10 are the people who had learned more robustly originally anyway.
Mm,
That's what's allowing them to keep growing.
mm,
So we might
yeah.
not see as much of that there. But yes, with the younger kids, we can definitely start to see those patterns from really early. And we can do wonderful things to help educators to learn how to meet the needs of individual students in their classroom
Yeah.
rather than trying to feed every kid the same thing.
Yeah, I would just wonder if there's a specific number of like quantifying how disjointed a performant a kind of arc is, and that
How bad that is. We'll
yeah,
find it. It's definitely modelable, and
yeah,
we'll
it's very
figure
interesting.
out how to do it. Yeah.
Well, go ahead and
It will have to be, because humans will not have the time to look at all of these. So we have to
mm,
have something that we can computerize. We'd be looking for evidence of those kinds of peaks and troughs, and
yeah,
but we need to learn more about those patterns
yeah.
before we do that.
If you can see folks on your screen, go ahead and just call on people who've got their hands raised if you want. Yeah.
And it's not showing me automatically the people with hands
Oh,
raised.
okay.
Let me see. Let me go to, if I go to a different view for people, it won't let me when I'm screen sharing.
I can
Oh,
also
yes, it
just.
will.
Oh, okay.
It-
Go for it then.
yep, yep, yep. It is letting me. It's nice to see more people. Okay, where are our hands? Oh, I see hands. Do you want me to call on
Yeah, go for
people?
it. Yeah.
Should I go with the cutest ones first, or
I could also play, moderator if you'd like, and just choose folks. It's up to you, but
why don't we go with you, Jonathan?
All right, I'll take that as a compliment if you're going with the cutest ones first.
We can see
Uh,
more of your face.
I wanted to ask about drilling down into one of the examples you gave. At the beginning, you were showing lists of vocabulary words that you said you assigned to these lists represented, and the score that what they were attached to represented the lowest level, lexical level that somebody could make sense of these words in.
Or
I
that
think one of
there would be a useful meaning for that person in that word. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So like so one of the words was bureaucracy, and I think that was assigned to the what 10 the 10 bot
Level 10, yeah.
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 So that means that like at level nine is what that's when somebody's doing abstract. That's the abstract level, I think. So that
Yeah.
means somebody doesn't usefully use the word bureaucracy. Like
Yeah,
how do we
it
determine
wouldn't
that?
it certainly wouldn't mean anything like what it means to us if they were using it at that level. Um, and you'd be able to tell because you could easily replace it with a word like um, city council
Like
or
what?
like city council, like something concrete. That there wouldn't be a notion of bureaucracy as a system visible in the performance. And I'm not
Uh-huh.
talking about systems at abstract systems level. I'm talking about a system with a whole bunch of ingredients in it that you can think of as the components of a bureaucracy and actions of a bureaucracy.
Hmm.
And there are words that just don't appear. You just don't see them. But then there are also words that appear because they're being taught in the classroom. So, and that's why we have our peak around 9, because in the modern classrooms, that's where they've taken the stuff that used to be taught in high school and they're putting it down to grade 4 where kids are age 9 for the most part.
Hmm.
So they're getting a bunch of high school level abstract mappings, constructs taught to them when they're just beginning to think abstractly. So we have a lot of terms that have been distorted in their meaning down to some really primitive meanings that end up in that bin because of trying to introduce them to kids way before the kids are really ready to be able to understand them as a whole. So,
Hmm.
and believe it, we do this with every single one, and we research it thoroughly, looking where it's found. We look for all of the meanings it makes. We look for synonyms and antonyms, and we place it with like 80% certainty. And then what now we've got so many items in the dictionary that we're not placing a lot of brand new words anymore, but we are curating all the time. And so when a when a word becomes a kind of meme in the language and it starts to get downward assimilated, then that gets moved to its new location
Hmm.
where it has a completely different meaning. So it's on a lot. All dictionaries have to stay alive this way because the languages are living
So maybe
things.
maybe with an example, like how would you go about determining that the word bureaucracy at 10 is not doesn't have the same depth of connotation of being all of the different stages and complexities that go into what we think of maybe when we say the word bureaucracy and um, the like the Kafka type of idea of bureaucracy. If if
There's so
like
many meanings for
how do you
that
go
term.
about
It's
that?
really wild.
How do you
Um,
scientifically go about a determination of that? Do you find people
well, do
who
you remember
use
the maps do you remember the maps that I showed you earlier that unpack the whole statement that someone makes
Mhm.
into a structure?
Yeah.
So we're doing right now, we're mostly doing that mentally. We're unpacking that construct based upon the structure of their argument as a whole. So these aren't just words that are coming at us. These are words in context. We're making meaning of the statement that's being made. We're seeing that meaning within the context of the larger meaning. And we're coming to the conclusion that, oh, the way that they're using that word right now is pointing to something like this. And it's not just that one person who's doing it, but we are also looking at all of the other uses of that term at the same time and how it's being used in a whole bunch of other performances. So it's just this very organic, one at a time, one at a time process. And it doesn't matter if we get everything perfect because every performance is based upon literally, usually in adulthood, hundreds of placements, right? So there's so many different items of information that the noise comes out in the wash and that we get really high quality scores even when things aren't perfect.
Well, I would be great if you could
But
explain a little bit more about the maps that you were making. Like, would one of those maps are the more nodes in that map indicative of a higher level? Like, is that how it works? Is there like some quantifiable way of determining the level based on the nodes in the map?
no, because the structure stuff doesn't work very well by itself because it depends what's in the structure. So you can have a really complex map with a lot of things in it, but what they are matters. And you can have a whole lot of nodes at a representational systems level 8 performance, and way fewer at level 9. So you can't really use how many nodes there are as a way of
So
determining.
a second ago, though, but a second ago you were saying that like the word bureaucracy would itself not be deterministic, but it would be the context of the maps that you were using around it. But if the maps themselves depend upon the content within them, then I'm seeing that like a
No, no, no,
circular
no.
quality here. Okay.
Sorry. That's not what I was saying. I was
Oh, okay.
saying
Sorry.
that with the way that we're thinking about the term is within the context of the whole argument that's been made, that one instance of that term. That term is not going to be placed based on one instance of the term. That term is going to be placed on how it's being used across. We want to understand how it's being used across the whole range of meanings that it has. So we're looking at it within the context of the multiple ways in which that word manifests in meaning. And then we're looking in each particular instance to understand what meaning they mean. We're looking at it within the context of the broader argument that they're making. And then we're just looking at all the concrete evidence that we have in the data. There's many, many bits of information that are going into making a determination. And remember, we always hold it lightly. They can always, so if we have new information, if something happens that causes us to think, well, wait a minute, there's something new going on with this term, we're pretty quickly going to get some indication of that and we're going to be rethinking the placement. But we're talking 40,000 dictionary items.
So it's like all of the dictionary items are balancing each other.
They're all, because there are so many of them and there's so many individual pieces that go toward making a score. There is a certain kind of balancing that happens if there's a couple of terms or meanings in that performance that weren't properly placed or weren't taken. We get outliers that just, they're weird. They don't seem to fit with everything else. And when that happens, we go look at the outlier and we say, did we misplace you before? Do you have a meaning that we didn't know about that we need to see if we can find and calibrate to? Okay, so what are the other words that mean something similar to this? We've got a thesaurus open, we got a dictionary open. We're using the internet to find out what the modern uses of terms are. There's many, many things going on in making placements. And always holding them lightly means that we can constantly be shifting and moving with them. So we created a system that's basically each performance is saturated. And we're accounting for every meaning, not every meaning that's expressed because sentences express a new level of meaning, but any meaning that's in something like a word or that behaves like a word is being accounted for before we get a score.
Okay.
So everything you said is in that graph, is represented in the graph.
Okay. I just wish there were like a more like a full concrete example. I know that on your website, I was trying to mention something about your website and what presentation that I gave, and it says like the deeper understanding of class is proprietary, and I understand this trade secret. But like if there would
Yeah.
just be like one concrete example that I could walk people through for making one scoring, that would really help in getting people on board with an intuitive understanding and trust of the system.
Oh, yeah, I've got Antonia sitting here taking that down right now so that we'll be thinking about that.
Oh, okay.
It's not, you're asking for a very difficult thing to be done.
Oh,
I
okay.
would like take a slide deck like this one to actually explain, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
something
but
it's
totally.
definitely a doable thing. It's just a matter of we're a nonprofit.
Yeah,
we, we don't have enough money to do what we're already doing.
yeah. Okay.
But it's worthwhile having it on the list. Brendan would love to see that too, I'm sure. Nobody would keep their hand down.
Okay. Next person. So,
Great. Thank you, Theo. That was a really great presentation. I've peripherally known about your work just by following Zach Stein for a few years, and I never took a deep dive into the V call. But now that I have a much better understanding, My question relates to the work that I'm doing out in Hayward, California right now as a postdoc. So I'm doing education research. And one of the things that I'm realizing, especially post-COVID, we just had an amazing amount of our budget cut from their district. And I think there's an opportunity also with AI emerging that a lot of the district, they don't know how to go about assessment when students have so much access to this. So my question for you is this. So in San Leandro out here, they piloted equitable grading where they wanted to just see, could they try something new that could assess students in a different way? What you're doing is wonderful. I mean, I think this really gets at the heart of how can we work within context so that way, as you know, social media has already disrupted knowledge in all kinds of ways. So how can we get back to sort of a baseline of this? So my question for you is twofold. One, have you been able to pilot this in like a school district or a school to see how that assessment would play out in terms of matching like state standards or accreditation? And then,
Matching state standards.
well, you know what I mean. It has to
It's
fit.
getting to be less of a problem than it was because there's a lot of dissolution of the system right now, which is good. I've got a group of people that I'm working with right now who we're planning to do piloting with probably starting in the second semester of this year. Right now, we're working on releasing the adult version of MindLog because we've got a whole bunch of adults who are really interested in using it and helping us with beta testing, but also helping us figure out, what do you guys want with that? Like, I mean, we can make a graph of your development, but what is this going to be used for? How is it going to be useful to us? What kinds of things do you want to be able to do with it? So we're going to start that pilot toward the end of July. And we'll be working that pilot, we'll get longitudinal data, unlike anything we've ever had, just in the 6 months. It'll be so amazing. And then we'll probably be starting in both colleges and K-12 environments and grade 5 up right now because little kids we have to interview and that's too expensive to get started with that. Um, but yeah, I'm really excited and lots of variety in the school so far. And we're always looking for more people who want to play in that sandbox when that time comes. So we've got a sign up page on the MindLog for Educators page is a link to a sign up page where if you have interest in participating, please let us know. And I usually get in touch with people who sign up on that list and have a chat with them.
Okay. And is that something
But
that
yeah,
you
and
drop
and
in the
and and,
chat?
and by the way, this is an AI preventer. Like you can't cheat with this because once we've got you, anything else doesn't look like you. It's
Yeah.
so having kids do all of their written work in college into MindLog is a way to make sure that they're doing their own work on top of everything else, right? Like it wasn't the reason we made it. We just found out that that was true by accident.
Are you
Whew.
familiar with the Promised Neighborhoods project? Nationally, they have different projects in different cities from the Department of Education.
What's it called?
Promised Neighborhoods.
Oh, it doesn't sound familiar, but there's a lot of things like that out there right now. The micro schools movement, yeah, there's a bunch of really interesting stuff that I'd like to be part of because I want to be able to also measure what's working and not just what's not working.
Well, if it's possible, whatever contact information or sign up page, if that can be dropped in chat, I'd like to follow up with you and see if I can connect you possibly to do a presentation with some education leaders out here in the
Oh,
East Bay. If they're not familiar with the work, I think they should be.
my old stomping grounds. Brendan, are you looking for the
Yeah, I'm dropping that
URL?
in right now. Well, I'll put in the that's just the URL for the contact page on Lectica's website. That I
When
just
you actually on our opening page now, the first thing you see is links to MindLog stuff. So, or
Great. Thanks
Connectome
again.
and MindLog.
Cool. Thank you.
There's more hands there. Hey, you guys already had your turn.
familiar faces.
I'd welcome more questions from either. I guess we'll go back to Jonathan.
All right, thank you. At the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned how you were having problems integrating your approach with Michael Common's approach, but you had an easier time integrating with Kurt Fisher's approach. And you mentioned something about how Kurt Fisher has some cyclical, recurring upon itself pattern to his approach, whereas Commons
Yeah.
doesn't. I didn't understand that. I'm wondering if you would go back over that in greater detail.
So you can see on the right-hand side is Fisher's model. So level 6, he calls it a single representation. Level 7's a mapping. Level 7, single mapping system. Yeah, so 6, single, 7, mapping, 8, system. 9 is a system of it's a system of systems, which becomes the first level of the abstract. Now, those boxes represent the kind of structure you're likely to see in performances at that level. And the numbers represent the level of abstraction. So instead of having one thing, just looking at structure, like we're trying to do with Commons model with some examples, we were able to go in and look at performances and ask the question, what's the structure of this? Like, what is the structure? What kind of structure is it? And then separately ask the question, is this a representation or is this an abstraction? And with just those two rules, we could score things accurately. We didn't need any other rules. So a lot of what Commons does in his, where he's doing a lot of descriptions of the kinds of things you find, stopped being necessary. And we stopped making that mistake of confusing 9 with 12 and 6 with 9. And because we now had a way to say, to differentiate between structure and abstraction that was much clearer.
Oh, so I see. So it's not so much that there's a recurrent cycle of like some tierings of like 3 by 3 by 3. It's just that Fisher makes this delineation mark between representations, which then are followed by abstractions, and so like some all the levels below representation are one type, and all the levels above abstraction and above are a different type. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, this is a tier. 6, 7, 8, 9. 6, 7, 8 is a tier, and then 9 starts the next tier.
But is there another tier then
And
that,
there's an earlier tier that isn't
but so does
represented
each of
here.
these
Yeah.
tiers have its own, have this, are they all the same number of stages within each, or?
There's 12 complete stages, or 13 actually, if you take 0 into account. Same as Common System. Same as Common Systems was before he started making up big higher ones, which are
Oh,
logically possible, but we've never seen evidence of them.
but so like in this image though, so you have 6, 7, 8, and then 9 you said starts the next one. So then that would mean 6,
Yeah.
7, and 8 are representations. 9 is an abstraction, but then you have 4, 9, 10, 11, and 12 in the abstraction. So that means that they have different numbers in the two tiers, 3 and
Right,
4.
because well, no, because 12 starts a different tier as
Oh,
well, like 9
okay.
does. Yeah. But it starts a different tier theoretically. It doesn't, we haven't actually found real evidence of much going on in individual human performances in that tier. The
Interesting.
level of complexity exists, but I haven't found the human minds that can do it
So,
yet.
so Fisher's idea is that every 3 stages creates a tier.
It takes 3 levels. It takes going from single representations to mappings to systems before you can create systems as systems at the next level. And once you've got systems as systems, that's another individual unit, but it's at a higher order of complexity. There's a lot written about this. You should be able to find it
Okay.
pretty easily. Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful.
And when you first meet this, it seems kind of complicated because it looks like there's 4 levels in each one, but there's really 3 levels in each one. And he does talk about that and why he did that in his
Hmm.
work. But it's just a really, really useful system for trying to build a more refined scoring system on. That's the
Yeah.
main point I was making there.
Just one more question before then I'll give it up to someone else. Is that so? It seems like this assessment system is based on the premise that someone's complexity of meaning making is reflected in their complexity of their articulation of their thinking. So that if somebody would be linguistically challenged, that we would then suppose then that that person is making meaning at a more simplistic level. Is that true?
No, not necessarily. I think if someone was linguistically challenged, we'd be trying to find ways for them to show us what they can really do.
Okay, but not using these approaches that we've developed so far, which seem to all be based on language, or are
Oh,
do you have?
I mean, the system can be used to look at social structures. It can be used to look at other kinds of evidence of knowledge structures. It's a hierarchical complexity. I mean, we're using it in language in this particular instance, but we also use it to analyze the complexity structure of organizations. The same principles apply no matter what we're looking at. We haven't actually come up against that problem outside of people who have trouble explaining what they're talking about verbally, and or so that they want to write, or they have difficulty with writing, so they want to do it verbally. But I'm sure that we'll come up against, questions about how do we deal with this when people have differential kinds of abilities. And we're certainly not saying that this is the only way that we should be looking at our growth. This is
Okay.
just an amazing breakthrough in looking at this kind of growth.
So what is this kind of growth? How are you putting a limitation on this kind of growth to define this domain that you're
We're
looking at?
looking at the development of meaning making because we believe it's giving us insight into the complexity of the connectome, the complexity structure of the connectome.
Oh, so I guess so my question was like, so then can we, then is there an assumption going on here that meaning making is limited by somebody's linguistic ability to express that meaning making?
No, we're not making that assumption.
So then how can we, if we're not making that assumption, then how can we retroductively figure out somebody's level of meaning making from their linguistic expression of it?
We score performances. We don't say that we are scoring per people. We say that we're scoring the performance that we have. That's the only claim we make. We believe that overall what we're doing in a general sense is that we're tapping into the meaning structure, the structure of the connectome. But we're not saying that's the only way that you can do that. And we're not saying we can see into that individual's mind. So we're counting on the social system in which that person's embedded into detecting that they have difficulty in this one area and finding other ways to look at their capabilities so that we've got a richer picture. And I think we should be doing that with everyone.
Okay, so when you say we're scoring
We're building,
performances,
we should be building up pictures of people with multiple measures rather than thinking there's a measure that can tell us all about a person.
oh, okay. So, but when you say then that we're scoring performances, then that doesn't. At first, I thought you were saying that we're trying to figure out somebody's meaning making, which seems like really broad. But if we're only scoring performances, then we're scoring their linguistic capacity to express their meaning making, right?
We are seeing the level at which they are able to create that performance. Yes, we are seeing the performance they've created. We know nothing about what their actual capacity is. We're blind to that. So it's, all we can do is assess the performance. It's going to take a community to figure out, how do we be fair to people who have different kinds of abilities? And what other kinds of measurement are we going to need to include to make sure that we're not excluding people who have um, skills that they have that we could learn about through other modalities? But in general, as a whole, our project is about trying to understand better, how to create environments that allow people to develop richly in the same way that the connectome is showing you how rich development works, where you're building skill over time and making connections and doing your learning in an embodied way. So it's a big push toward making learning in schools more embodied, which will serve everyone. So everyone's going to be
Okay.
served by doing that. Um, and this form of measurement will be more useful for the majority of people than it is for people who have deficiencies. But when we learn that someone has got a different kind of ability, then we go and we start looking at them from a bunch of different perspectives. No
Mm.
kind of measurement serves everybody. This is way too complex. It's
Okay.
psychology.
So like when
No
we
kind
you
of
were
measurement serves
when
everybody.
you were saying in the presentation like that with this class we can track your child you could track your child's development. That was under
You
the
can track
assumption
this particular kind of development really well. Yeah.
you could track this performance really well because you're
Through
saying
their
even
performances, right? I believe that the amount of growth we see taking place will probably be about right. Like the change that we see over time, we're doing something very consistent. So the change we're seeing is real and it's growth, regardless of where someone comes in or starts or the level of their skill with words. When we're looking at growth, we're still going to be seeing growth, but it might not be telling the whole story about that particular child's growth. It won't be telling the whole story about anybody's growth. There's not a form of measurement that can do all of that. It's too much to ask of any individual form of measurement. The goal here was to get really good at measuring one thing, hierarchical complexity, just like it's a ruler. But if you want to model a weather system, you need lots of rulers, and humans are complex. So I want other people to take on the challenge of figuring out what are the other dimensions that we really need to understand in order to build a whole picture of somebody's development.
How about we finish up with Mateo's question and then call it a day?
I have one more big question in regards to people which didn't really have like primary education in the sense that they didn't really go to kindergarten or to like the first couple of years of
Yay! I
school.
hope not.
Yeah, I hope not, obviously. But have you seen in the data, or have you have you actually looked into these kinds of people, what their development level is? Because we know that you have much lower impulse control and such, right? Um,
I think all of that's nonsense. Like I hate that
mhm.
research. I think that it's
Interesting.
research. Um, there's so much that goes on in educational
Hmm.
research that's just makes me want to scream.
Hmm.
Um, we have so many assumptions about children's development that are just they're seeing like one little narrow slice of something and they're concluding that that's the universal thing
Hmm.
with no humility about what it is that they're measuring. I
Hmm.
mean, it drives me nuts. So
Hmm.
homeschooled kids who are unschooled do extremely well. They're better regulated, they're more
Hmm.
advanced, they're better learners, they learn by themselves better, they recall, they're more creative,
Hmm.
they kids in inner cities who don't go to school are often living in environments that are also super toxic and
Yeah.
causing all sorts of problems. They're having all kinds of things done to them. Um,
Hmm.
the parents of children who are wealthy and want their kids to be lawyers do all kinds of awful things in early childhood that mess up their children's ability to learn. If we provide the right kind of environment for students to be in with the right kind of adult support for learning, and now we can get access to any kind of knowledge that we want, like at a
Hmm.
press of a button, and we focus on the things that the child's naturally leaning toward and occasionally nudge them to something else they can integrate in with that, and we do this gently and we let them go at their own pace. They will develop so much better. And I think for the kids that are coming into the school system really struggling, what we try to do is we try to get them up to speed, right? Like, let's get them up to speed. No, they're disadvantaged. They're years behind. They need years of our care. They need us to read those stories to them. They need us to provide that safe human environment. They need to have all of that before we start, like we need to give them the time that they need. We can get a superficial bump by teaching them some stuff that they can pass a test with, but it does not lead to better performance. It doesn't lead to a better mind. It creates additional problems, the system currently anyway. We don't have to do it that way.
Awesome. Well, this was amazing. Thank you so much. I really do. Yeah, we've gone a bit over time, almost by an hour. So I really appreciate you sticking around with us. And clearly, there's a lot alive for people around your work. There's a lot more questions. Maybe we can do another one of these in the future if you're open to it, and we could have more time for Q&A. I also wanted to plug for people who are really curious about all this, the FOLA course, the Fundamentals, Foundations of Lectical Assessment course, which goes through, the rich literature on developmental psychology, and is a wonderful, wonderful course I learned a lot from. And I think there's one coming up in the fall, correct?
FOLA is coming up at the end of August. First meeting of this new
Oh,
FOLA
okay.
is coming at the, and I just discovered yesterday that I hadn't put the dates and times on the web page yet. But if you go to the web page after today, you will see the dates and times
Yeah.
and be able to fill in a form if you're interested. We've had several applicants already, and we're just waiting to make sure that we have enough people to really make a year
Mm.
of developmental delight work. So.
Yeah, cool. Well, if you're on the fence and you're watching this or you're here in the audience, then I highly recommend it. Well, let's call
And
it
we
a
also teach people how to VCall.
yeah, lots of practices, and yeah, I found it again just it really enriching and really transformative for my understanding of the field and the background for a lot of these very complex but really important topics. So, highly recommend. Let's call it a day there. Thanks again, Dr. Dawson. Much appreciated. And thank you so much for all the work that you've done. And yeah, I look forward to continuing to work with you. And I'm really excited for the launch of MindLog, which it sounds like now is in July coming out.
Yeah, it's going to be July for the
Okay,
for the beta.
cool. Super excited for that. So, cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for showing up. And thank you again, Dr. Dawson. Really appreciate it. So, till next time.
Thank you. Thank you guys for asking questions.
Thank you.